I'm really excited to introduce our next speaker. So let's get into this. Carol Fishman Cohen is the CEO and co-founder of iRelaunch. She's a builder of corporate career reentry programs and the leader of the iRelaunch #return to work community, now nearly 100,000 strong. Carol is also a pioneer in the career reentry space. Her viral TED Talk, How to Get Back to Work After a Career Break, has 3.6 million views and has been translated into 30 languages. She's the host of the popular 321 iRelaunch podcast. I'm so sorry, y'all. Apparently English is difficult for me today. She's also the author of the seminal Harvard Business Review article, The 40-Year-Old Intern. So I'm really excited to welcome Carol to the stage today. Carol, thank you so much for joining us. Is there anything that you'd like to add to that introduction before we jump into questions today?
Hi, Meg. It's great to see you, and thanks for that introduction. And the only other thing is I have a new article that just came out in Harvard Business Review, and I think we'll probably talk about that. But yeah. It was the sort of successor article to that original one that you mentioned. So looking forward to the conversation.
Me too. All right, so let's get going here. And just as a reminder to anybody who is, joining us either, especially on the website, please feel free to submit questions that you might have for Carol. Let us know if you agree with what Carol's saying. If you disagree, we'd love to see your comments and questions. So please feel free to share those. All right, so let's start this off here. We learned a little bit about your background, but let's talk about what led to the start of iRelaunch.
Sure. So I am a relauncher, as we call people at iRelaunch. We call people who are returning from career breaks from 1 to over 20 years for a whole range of reasons, relaunchers. So I'm a relauncher myself. I was a financial analyst at an investment bank, and I was on maternity leave with my first child when my company collapsed. So I decided not to go looking for the next big job. That began my career break. I had 3 more kids and was home with them for 11 years. Between 1990 and 2001, a long time ago. And then after the 11 years, I went back to work at an investment firm. And I was able to do that because there were people working there who used to work with me a dozen years before in the investment bank. So I've been through every phase of this transition firsthand, and I went through it at a time in 2001 where there were no programs and no one was talking about this, and I didn't know a single other person who was returning to work after a career break. You either worked all the way through or you were home and you didn't go back. So that was an isolating experience for me. And I later co-authored a book called Back on the Career Track with Vivian Steer-Rabin, another relauncher who took a multi-year career break and returned. And then we co-founded iRelaunch. And I guess the other thing along the way is Harvard Business School did a case study about my return to work at Bain Capital, the investment firm where I returned to.
That's so amazing. And thank you so much for sharing, kind of what led to you becoming a returner, because I think that's one of the things that we are constantly trying to work against or work to widen and broaden is the idea that, being a relauncher and needing to come back to work after some type of either break or caregiving is not just a thing that women do. You know what I mean? It is something that men do sometimes. And if they, obviously the vast majority tend to be women, but if we're going to make this a true, equality based, based program or based idea, then you need to talk about, men that take those career breaks as well and make that, normalize it so that more people feel both empowered to take them as well as to come back from them afterwards.
I just want to stop for a second. This is such a point, Meg, because we look at the relaunching population very broadly. Now, originally, when we wrote, I've been in the space since I relaunched myself. So almost, about 20 years now. And originally when Vivian and I wrote the book, the subtitle referenced stay-at-home moms. And we were looking at the population of women who took career breaks for childcare reasons initially, but now we look at relaunchers much more broadly. As you're saying, men and women who take career breaks for childcare reasons and also for reasons that have nothing to do with childcare, elder care, a health issue, an expat experience where you're a trailing spouse or partner in another country, military spouses who have career continuity issues, people who are unretiring. So it's a very broad population now, much broader than it originally was. But yes, women who take career breaks for childcare reasons are still the dominant subset.
Makes a lot of sense. All right, so let's jump into the focus of today's conversation. So like we talked about earlier, you had your original HBR article that was, just wildly accepted. Let's talk a little bit about your more recent article. It's called Return to Work Programs Come of Age. And it talks a little bit about the evolution of these programs after almost 20 years. So can you share with us a little bit of that evolution so that we can maybe understand where we were and then where we are now?
Yes. So let's talk about that evolution in terms of how the programs themselves have evolved, and then what are the drivers of the expansion of these programs? Who's running them, and what does that growth look like? So originally, the very first programs were in 2005, 2006. Lehman Brothers had a return to work program called Encore. UBS had one called Career Comeback that was later revived years later. Tuck, Dartmouth Business School, was running a back to business program with funding from Citi. So those were the original programs. The first returnship program, a professional mid-career return to work internship program, which many of the programs are structured as today. That first one came about in 2008 when Goldman Sachs started the first one, and also Sara Lee Corporation started returnships at Sara Lee the same year, but they were restructured and that program went away. So the original programs were more project-based and more similar to what you might think an entry-level student internship program might be. You have an experience for a few weeks, you do a project, and there's a possibility you get hired afterward. And as time has gone on, we've really seen these programs evolve to what we call intent to hire programs. So there's a job attached to each one of those returnship experiences. And it's more the expectation that you are going to convert and be hired at the end of it than the possibility. And as you can imagine, that's shifted the whole way that recruiters recruit and teams integrate someone who they're all planning to be an ongoing member of their team, as opposed to someone who's more like a contractor who's just kind of dropped in for a period of time. So that's really, really important. And then the other thing we've seen is that, first of all, we have a lot of data on these programs now. They're really successful. The model of using an internship-like experience to engage with people returning, the conversion rates of people, percentage of people are hired who complete these programs are over 80%. The data of companies that we work most closely with is it's around 84%. So clearly a successful model. And we're even seeing some companies migrate to a model where they don't have the internship anymore. They hire people from day one as employees, still provide some sort of transitional programming and support and mentoring, but originally the returnship was all about risk, and it was risky to hire someone who was coming off of career break. And now, because we have all this data and programs have been running a long time, we never thought that was the correct, it was a perception, and we're seeing now that it's not that risky, and we're seeing a lot of success. So that's part of it. The other piece is the original wave of return to work programming, as you could hear from the names I was mentioning, started on Wall Street. And Wall Street was really the first sector to have this kind of a crisis moment where for generations, women had been leaving as they progressed up the career ladder. And then all of a sudden there became a sense of urgency around, we don't have enough women in mid to senior level roles. So these programs started as diversity initiatives where companies could reconnect with people at that mid-career level who then could be poised and ready to advance. So the first wave was in Wall Street, and you can see, like, we're having our iRelaunch Return to Work conference coming up in October. It is traditionally the conference where we have a lot of Wall Street and financial services companies, and you can just see all the major Wall Street firms, investment firms, rating agencies, financial services, very strong representation in terms of who has their own program. The next wave really happened, I'd say, starting until 2015, we and the Society of Women Engineers started the STEM Reentry Task Force, which was an initiative working with individual companies in the tech sector to start return to work programs. And that initiative now is in its 6th year. And we've seen that companies that are either legacy tech companies, Silicon Valley tech companies, or companies in other sectors, but that have tech at the core, that's been the next wave of return to work programs that we've seen in terms of sector. And now, right now, in real time, we are seeing the 3rd wave. And that is really being driven by the public sector. And we just saw, and we actually worked with the state of Utah on the very first state returnship program that just launched a couple of weeks ago. And we expect that program to lead the way in terms of public sector returnship programs at the city, state, and national level.
So interesting that it can be broken down like that into, the various sectors that kind of help push these things forward. Because I feel like when a lot of people think of career breaks and maybe the reasoning for people to have them, it was, like you said, it was very understood that a lot of it from the beginning was going to be women focused, and it was going to be for, childcare reasons, to raise a family. Then you get into the sandwich generation of, people like my parents who were caring for, their parents as well as raising children. So, you kind of start to see these different reasons for why people need that break. And now we're rolling into and seeing a lot of the repercussions of, having to have a career break, usually unprecedented and unexpected during COVID.
Right.
So let's unpack that a little bit about the various factors that kind of play into this. Because you talked about those 3 different waves, but obviously it has been growth. Obviously, more recent growth is what we're going to remember. But do you think that the growth has been steady over the course of those 3 waves? Do you think that it's been, maybe there was like a huge peak in the center wave, but not in the 3rd? What do you think about this?
So we've seen sort of gradual and steady growth. And at this point, about 40% of the Fortune 50 have return to work programs. Less than 10% of the Fortune 500 have them. So there's definitely a skewing toward, we see much larger companies are the leaders in starting these programs. And that makes sense because they have the biggest hiring needs. But also, when you look at the Fortune 50, it's not including private companies like Vanguard that have a program, or companies that are based internationally like TD Bank or Credit Suisse that have programs, or the public sector programs like the state of Utah. However, it's been a very gradual progression. But I'd say by the end of 2019, before COVID really hit, we were starting to see a lot of activity. And then when COVID hit, there was, I'd say, maybe a couple of months, March through May-ish, where especially big companies, had to focus on, we're moving tens of thousands of people from the office to home, and that was the priority, of course. But interestingly, we saw the return to work programs evolve pretty seamlessly into virtual models, and we continue to see programs start. And now there is more of an urgency around this because, as you point out, Meg, there's a whole wave of people who withdrew from the labor force during the pandemic. And that number, interestingly, was almost equal at this point between men and women, about 1.6 million women and about 1.5 million men, according to the more recent reports from the National Women's Law Center, which has just done excellent work in analyzing these numbers. But that's almost 3 million people who are not counted in the unemployed. We're not talking about jobs lost. We're talking about people who intentionally withdrew from the labor force during the pandemic. We call it the pandemic exodus. And so the big question is, when is this population going to return? And how long are their career breaks going to be? And so the companies that are the employers that have these return to work programs in place are going to be best positioned to engage with the pandemic exodus group that's left, and all the people who were already on career break before that who were looking to come back. So I think we are seeing more of an urgency around it now, and we're seeing a tremendous amount of activity of companies of all different sizes and employers in all different sectors. So yes, the pandemic has had an important impact on activity in the space, but also we're seeing some other factors. So as you mentioned, we talked about earlier, these programs started as diversity programs, gender diversity programs, really focused on getting more women back into the workforce. There's been, as this conference is all about, a very big focus on racial and ethnic diversity, and so a much broader set of diversity goals for employers that are thinking about engaging with people who are returning after a career break so it's not just gender anymore. And also, I'll just mention age diversity, because as you can imagine, the people who are coming back after career breaks tend to be in their 40s and 50s or even in their 60s. So there's that diversity piece too. So we're seeing that. And then tighter labor markets. We've seen a lot about that in the press. It can be very sector specific, but we're seeing companies think more and more about how do we use these programs to bring back people with non-traditional career paths more broadly, and can we, use the same structures and broaden programs to include people that, like, change our definition and broaden our definition a little bit about who's eligible, in part because we want more people to come back to work through these programs.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, selfish question here. Apologies because it's not one that we pre-prepped for. But when you talk about this pandemic exodus, do you think that the large shift of most companies, or a lot of new companies, to spearhead and start or maybe expand their returnship or internship opportunities, do you think that has more to do with the sheer numbers, or do you think it has more to do with the fact that we're now including many, many more men, I would say basically anybody that's from that dominant, like, cis, white, hetero, like, male group? Do you think that it's because the men are also there, or do you think it's because of the huge numbers? I have my suspicions, but I'm not,
okay, what I will say is that men are eligible to apply for and participate in these programs, and we see men in these programs, and we're seeing more men. Now, I wouldn't necessarily say that that's the driver. The driver is that employers have recognized that this is a high caliber pool. It's truly a hidden talent pool, and people don't lose their ability to be high performers simply because they take a career break. And there's more of a recognition that when the companies or managers start to see who's coming in the door in these programs, that's when they start to expand. That more and more managers will say, I want to be part of this. Or I was skeptical at first, but whoa, look at the people who are coming in the door. So I would say there's a lot of factors here. That's one of the main drivers, and that was the original concept, was that this is a high caliber pool. This is a pool, if you think about who's in the pool, experienced, educated professionals, mature perspective, and we're more fully formed as humans when we're further along in our life stage. We know ourselves better. So
undoubtedly.
So it's actually the opposite of how we might have been early on, as we should be early on. We're in exploratory career mode. When we are coming back from career break, it's really the opposite. The career break allows us to step back and reflect on whether we were on the right career path to begin with. Many of us find that we want to go back to the same thing we left. And I should point out that return to work programs are really focusing on people who have relevant skills from before their career break or transferable skills. So the person who decides, and some people do, that they were not on the right career path to begin with, and they're going to relaunch in an entirely new direction, that profile may not be the perfect candidate for a company return to work program. But we work with tens of thousands of relaunchers, and most of them return without a program. And there are all sorts of interesting examples of how people have career transitioned and relaunched at the same time. But anyway, to answer your question, I think the existence or the emergence of more men in this pool is an interesting development, but I don't necessarily think it's a driver. Now, I will say statistically at our iRelaunch Return to Work conferences for years, and we're about to run our 30th conference. So,
Oh, wow.
yeah, so we've been running these
Congratulations. That's so cool.
Thank you. We've been running these conferences since 2008. Consistently, we had 7% men for years. Our last conference, which was, of course, middle of the pandemic, May 2021, 14% men. So it doubled. And that's, of course, in part because of a COVID impact, but also it's becoming more common for men to take career breaks for childcare reasons, and there's less stigma attached to it. And more men are willing to go public with their return to work stories, where we used to not be able to get men to, they're like, I'd rather have everyone just forget about the fact that I ever took a career break. But now men are more comfortable coming forward, and we have more success stories in the public domain as role models.
Yeah, I love that. I think you're absolutely right. It's a lot of factors at play. Okay, so we do have some questions coming in from the chat. So we only have about 6 or 7 minutes left before we have to transition. Okay. So Matthew had asked, he's curious to hear your thoughts on career continuity interruptions due to industry disruption, which often entails switching careers, roles, or industries. So one of the things that I thought of when I read this, and it may or may not be Matthew's ask, my mother-in-law is in the travel industry. She books travel for people for American Express. That's not a thing. That's not a thing right now. And it certainly wasn't a thing like for the last, 12 to 18 months. So what are your thoughts on this? Does it, if your industry is disrupted, does that change the landscape for you? Or is it something that, you really just kind of proceed as normal, find a returnship, or try and find a new career that, utilizes either your same or, your same skills, transferable skills? What's your thoughts on this?
Excellent question. And, we are seeing a range of strategies on it. So let me just give you some examples to illustrate. So for example, on the technical side, and technical relaunchers and employers who are hiring technical relaunchers are really worried about technological obsolescence. So yeah, you were an electrical engineer and you worked at Motorola for 10 years and now you've been on a 10-year career break. How is that candidate going to look attractive or be accepted to one of these programs? So we've actually seen engineers who've been on long career breaks start to take like the MIT edX course in Python. So some of these free, high quality courses to reskill or upskill something related. So maybe they're training essentially to be data scientists, brand new field, related to their old one, using credentialing, using coursework to upskill, reskill, and signal to an employer how serious you are about returning. We saw some interesting career transition stories that are very applicable now. We've actually had several people do this now. We had someone in media who wanted to go into finance, and they got certified in anti-money laundering and hired 2.5 or 3 months later.
How is that a thing? Oh, now I've got all kinds of questions.
Yes. So there is a professional association for almost every field. There is an anti-money laundering professional association. They have this credential. The regulatory compliance area in financial services is hiring like crazy. And they bring in people who have this background, even if they're career transitioners, if they have demonstrated that they have the interest and they have the seriousness by investing in this credential. So I'd say credentialing and coursework can be really helpful in people who are trying to move out of a sector that is dying. We also had this in people who were classic brand marketers. They were in the brand marketing program at Procter & Gamble, but they've been on a 10-year career break. So now if they get a digital marketing credential, they are so unique. They have classic brand training, plus they have the new technology understanding. I think that makes them a really interesting candidate. So, well, so there's that.
Marketing isn't just for 18 to 22-year-olds. Like you have to market to a wide variety of people. So yeah, I think that's really great.
So I'd say, yeah, for people who are in sectors that have been hard hit and may not revive in the same way, you're saying, using, the travel sector as an example, you do have to think about transferable skills and be able to tell a story that makes it is compelling to an employer about why you are a great candidate for their role. And that's something that takes practice, and developing that how you tell that story, practicing it like it's a theater performance, like it's a script, and feeling really comfortable delivering it is going to be key to how you relaunch. Because I should throw in here an impartial answer to this question too, is you're not going to get your job by sending 100 resumes into the void. It's going to be who you know and who you network with, and that's different now in the virtual framework, but that's a whole separate focus of a different conversation. But so those are some initial ideas.
Okay. I'm going to try to get to one more question here. We had a question from Valerie in the chat. Valerie said, for these return to work programs, do you entertain the idea of categorizing jobs into sectors as well as number of gap years? Valerie says, I personally have a gap of 10 plus years, and it's very different from someone who quit during the pandemic. And that, I mean, that's a really good point. Is this something that requires a different, maybe a different approach or a different mindset for someone who's coming off of a long gap versus someone who, is, like you said, kind of new to this pool?
That's a great question and a very good distinction. So, there could be an argument now that people take these shorter career breaks, although I would argue they're going to be longer than they think. But these shorter career breaks during COVID could almost say it's a COVID career break, and people instantly know what they talk about. And it's like,
gives you that shorthand. Yeah.
For the longer career break, we tell people, first of all, don't self-select yourself out of the program by thinking you're not eligible. Eligibility guidelines are loosening, and let the employer decide whether you're eligible or not. So if you were a substitute teacher, or we have people who are working at Panera or doing Instacart, it's like completely outside their main line of business, but they're trying to get a side income. So, you have a consulting business, occasional consulting. So the idea that you had some sort of income stream during your career break, don't worry, don't assume that's going to make you ineligible. You should put the person with long career break, a section, and this is when you apply to return to work programs, the top section of your category of experience, not work experience, but experience, is going to be career break. Like, you have to call it out in big letters, career break, 2015 to the present. And then bullet points underneath. It could be Carol Fishman Cohen Consulting, occasional consulting in the digital marketing area. This is the coursework I took. This is volunteer experience. But you're calling it out in the context of a career break, because you have to have a career break to be eligible to apply for and participate in these programs. Huge milestone there, because remember, career breaks used to be the grounds for throwing it out. Now it's what
gets you into the program.
Eligibility. So you absolutely call it out in that way.
Okay. And thank you for talking about that, because I've actually, so I sit in on a lot of these. I've never heard that, advice for structuring your resume, and I absolutely love it. Because, if you're taking a side hustle, or you are, taking the job that you need to get by, my entire resume is like that. Like, it's important, and it should show that you're a hustler. It should show that you are driven to get back into the workforce. It should show that you are pragmatic and a realist, and you are trainable, and you are willing to learn new things. It's huge. Okay, we've run out of time, but before we go, how can our audience members connect with you and continue this conversation?
Okay, so just to clarify, that strategy for career break is specifically to apply for companies or employers that have return to work programs. Okay, just want to make sure I made that point. So to connect with us, please come to iRelaunch.com if you're an individual, or if you're an employer who wants to pitch to your employer. If you're from an employer, you want to pitch starting a return to work program there. We have the business case for return to work programs for employers, and we also have many tools and resources for individuals. So iRelaunch.com. And if you want to contact us, our team, info@iRelaunch.com. We'll get to our team, and it will get to me if it's supposed to get to me. So thank you so much, Meg, for the opportunity to have the conversation.
Thank you for joining us today. I do see Shannon Amsbacher is in the chat over here sharing all the links. So thank you, Shannon. And thank you so much, Carol. This was absolutely wonderful. It's a great way for me to kick off day 3. So thank you so much for being here with us.
Thanks, Meg. Great to be here.